The German foreign minister is visiting China from December the 8th to the 9th at the invitation of Chinese Foreign Minister Wang. The trip, announced after several rounds of scheduling uncertainty, is finally underway on the heels of French President Emmanuel Macron's visit to China. Throughout the year, China and the EU have stepped up high-level exchanges with deepening economic cooperation and cultural ties. What could we expect from this visit? What does it mean for China-EU relations going forward, particularly the bilateral relations between China and Germany? For more on this and its broader implications, let's turn to our panelists. For more on the latest development on the relations between China and Germany, we are joined by Hubertus Veit, Managing Director of Frankfurt Main Finance, Ulrich Bruckner, Jean Monnet Professor for European Studies at Stanford University, Jiang Feng, Professor of European Studies at Shanghai International Studies University, last but not least, Kevin Tu, Managing Director of Agora Energy China. Gentlemen, what a pleasure to see all of you. Now, the German foreign minister in a visit to China, earlier, we know the trip was canceled once, but it seems that it's back on track. According to the foreign minister of Germany before the trip, it is about trade. He is here to discuss in favor of free trade and remove trade barriers. Now, to you, Mr. Veit, what does that mean?
Well, trade between China and Germany is all important. As a matter of fact, in the first 9 months of this year, China and Germany's bilateral trade was the most important trade relationship Germany has. It even overtook the US as an importance of trade relation. And Germany has long been regarded as the engine and leading force within the EU for China-German relationships. And as this relationship is going to be readjusted, recalibrated, this visit is all important. And to give you a figure which has just been published today, China's trade surplus has surpassed for the first time in history $1 trillion.
And now there seems to be quite a divide about what's needed to be done for the German business community vis-a-vis the German politicians, especially in the coalition government.
Things haven't changed that much. There are the big companies that are deeply invested in China, such as Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, or the chemical giant BASF. And for them, de-risking, which has been discussed for quite a while, means being more engaged in China. When on the other hand, the bulk of German companies are small and medium-sized enterprises, and they rather shy away from growing risks and uncertainties. And everyone communicates with the German government, no matter if it was the previous one or the current one. They are all fully aware of the great potential to do business with China, but on the other hand, also the growing risks.
We see, interestingly, some numbers coming from German Chamber of Commerce. In China, 56% of German companies that are surveyed considering more engagement with Chinese partners rather than less, with the primary motivations being business expansion in China and the need to adapt to the China speed. That is according to the latest survey released last week, if I understand right. Meanwhile, we also see German business communities themselves looking at geopolitical risks as rather a big concern. If looking at the Chamber's 2025 to 2026 Business Confidence Survey, 75% of German companies said that China-European Union and China-Germany relations influence their businesses in China, with 34% reporting the relations provide a solid foundation for operations. 64% of those surveyed identify improving the China picture in Germany as the leading expectation for the German government. Interesting numbers, isn't it, Professor Jiang?
I mean, the trade relationship and the economic relationship, they are running very excellent, well. And so what the governments should do is to support and to make, they should not stay in the way of the economic and the trade development. And that's also my impression in my discussion with the German companies. And very often they are concerned that they do not get enough support or in that respect.
What about those numbers that I read earlier coming from the latest survey of German business in China? And also, how is that related to the priorities of Germany, including this coalition government, at least for now?
Yeah. Well, the priority of this coalition government clearly has three pillars. Pillar number one is to have the competitiveness of the German economy being reestablished. The second thing is to have the transformation going on. The third one is that we restore peace in Europe. All of these three fronts, I think the bilateral relationship between China and Germany is key. China has all the means and also the quantity that's needed to succeed in transformation. And obviously, the bilateral trade relations are key to reestablishing growth, because the more trade you have, the more bilateral trade you have, it's clearly having growth impacts.
We understand there's a latest publication of U.S. national security strategy in which there has been what some consider, for example, the Council on Foreign Relations analysis about that strategy as deprioritize Europe in the overall U.S. approach for this administration, at least 3 years to go. So your thoughts on that, and as a result, with this news hanging in the backdrop, what does that mean for the German foreign minister when he is in China? What kind of relationship he needs to create and nurture with his Chinese counterpart?
When we look at the importance of Europe in a world of emerging markets and growing population in other parts of the world, there is less of an importance of Europe. That's simply a fact. On the other hand, the relations are not just based on what in the Obama administration used to be a pivot to Asia, but this is a very open change of priorities and calling the European civilization as something that needs to be changed by American intervention to support right-wing parties as their understanding of a freedom of expression. This is a very different attitude in transatlantic relations and in the definition of what means Western. So as a consequence, for visits like Foreign Minister Wadepul's visit to China, a diversification strategy and a development towards more strategic autonomy, which also includes different relationships with other parts of the world, and not just counting on transatlantic relations will always be what Europeans would wish it to be. This is part of the visit, and this tries to find out where do we have common denominators and where can we address challenges of the 21st century together.
Obviously, the key issue is security in supply chain, reliability, resilience of those supply chains. That is something that needs to be addressed from an economic point of view, and that is something which I'm very sure will be one of the key topics to be discussed.
The United States, for example, with the latest national security strategy, it is interesting that economies are having a second thought as to how they prioritize different issues. We have seen in the US cases, for example, a shift from ideology and geopolitical only to more geoeconomic, and also looking at countries such as China in a different lens, at least according to the latest document. Now, of course, US and Europe, Germany, very different. But in a world of tremendous changes, how much do you think the Chinese side is expecting the German side to be pragmatic and also be able to seek common ground through trade and economic ties?
I think the relationship between China and Europe and Germany especially is not of nature of geopolitical conflict. Between China and Germany, the relationship is very much practical and in common interest. And that's the tradition of these two countries. Now, the situation has changed since China's productivity or competitiveness is increasing rapidly and export to German market and to European market in the field of automobiles and electricities and machinery and so on. And that's also some of huge competition for European companies and German companies. And to deal with the new situation, and I would like to see this more competitive situation, and the politicians of Germany and China should exchange more closely and constructively. And that's why, and the foreign minister, Mr. Waterfall's visit in China and the following visit of Chancellor Merz are of great importance, and to really readjust the development of the relationship between the two countries and to give the strategic direction in the future.
Many would wonder whether the earlier model of cooperation is still the mainstream anymore, since China has developed and Germany is different. Earlier, we see German investment in China for the Chinese markets alone and also export to the rest of the world. And now we see the Chinese innovation has really been catching up. Not only that, but leading the way, for example, in battery, in clean energy, in electronic vehicles, and the list to go, telecommunications, the list goes on. And it's not expensive compared to some of the other service providers. So as a result, whether the earlier cooperation model should be evolving, or one has to cling to the earlier model no matter what and ask why it shouldn't be like earlier?
I would use the solar panel manufacturing industry as one example. In the early years of the industry, back in early 2000s, Chinese manufacturers benefited enormously from the subsidy in the EU countries, especially Germany. Then, following trade friction, China provided its own domestic supporting program, which now the Chinese manufacturers achieve economies of scale very fast. In the end, we have seen an industry that had been entirely dominated by Chinese manufacturers, from polysilicon manufacturing to solar panel modules. On the one hand, this traditional collaboration mode certainly is very beneficial from the perspective of Chinese manufacturers. But looking ahead, if we look at strategic industries such as electrical vehicle, battery storage, as well as hydrogen economy related technology, how Germany and China may nurture politically viable but mutually beneficial new types of collaboration models are very important for sustainable development of bilateral relations, because in the end, winner-take-all may serve the interest of the one party, but if we are talking about bilateral relations, talk about a multipolar world, I do believe it's very important to look at win-win collaboration among countries.
What about that win-win you are specifically proposing, Mr. Tu, in your field, for example, clean energy, a solar panel as an example?
If we look at clean energy technology, I would like to use electrical vehicle industry as another example. We know there's ongoing tariff imposed by European Union on imports of Chinese EVs. However, recently, I also noticed some leading EU car manufacturers started to buy stake of leading Chinese EV and battery storage company, which means European manufacturers started to access core technologies in Chinese clean technology companies without apparent intervention from Chinese government. I see this is a precursor of the so-called win-win collaboration. Only if both German, EU, and Chinese company could coexist in the clean energy technology ecosystem, both could benefit from not only the Chinese market, but even the EU market and the third market, then we are talking about the real win-win collaborations.
We have seen one after another visits by European politicians. Some have been earlier delayed, but others have been newly planned. For example, earlier visit by the French President Macron to China, in which both sides signed 5 memorandum, a communique rather. Meanwhile, we also see German Foreign Minister in China following earlier visit by the Vice Premier and also the Finance Minister of Germany. And at the same time, according to media reports, likely to see visits by German Chancellor together with Prime Minister of Britain. That's according to media reports only. How do you see this series of visits could lay the foundation for real communication and solution-based discussions between China and the European countries, of course, with an emphasis on Germany in our conversation. Mr. Tu, briefly from you.
So if we look at the increasingly active diplomacy between EU and its key member countries and China, this indicates the need for both sides to change the mentality. I would propose both sides need to learn from each other instead of pointing finger towards each other. Giving you one very simple example, this is necessary because if we look at United States, US actually has learned a lot from China about industry policy, about other issues in order to contain China, like put it frankly. So that's why EU should really try to learn something about why Chinese energy and clean technology sector have been so competitive. But other than that, meanwhile, China should also learn from EU and its key member economy. For instance, China should not only trying to learn from EU on technological innovation, we should also try to learn from EU countries how to improve the welfare for the younger generation, for the workers.
Go to you, Professor Buchner.
Regarding the pragmatism, yes, this is definitely what we should focus on. And even if there are overcapacities that could challenge European industries and the German car industry in particular, we should also keep in mind that we don't meet our climate goals if we don't import productive products from China, because that is something we cannot do alone. So both sides benefited in the past, and we will benefit in the future if we follow such a pragmatic path.
All right. Professor Jiang, please.
I'm very optimistic concerning the further development of the relationship between China and Germany and Europe. And the politicians, they are talking about their problems, their challenges. And I think that's the first step to get solutions. Europe and China should learn from each other.
Go to Mr. Fate, last but not least.
Well, this visit is a precursor to the visit of our Chancellor Merz. And let me quote Confucius here. 3 kinds of friends are beneficial: straightforward friends, sincere friends, and well-informed friends. And I believe that Germany clearly has its challenges. China has its challenges too. And honestly, it leaves out a lot of potential because with a trade surplus of 1 trillion, you usually in trade theory have an adjustment mechanism that's called currency. If you would have a revaluation of your currency, you have tremendous terms of trade benefits. You would balance it. It would hugely benefit your Chinese population and readjust the inequalities in trade. So there are mechanisms which we need to talk about, because at the end of the day, it's our two countries which are gaining from that.